You are on your knees on cold concrete, the kind of cold that seeps right through your jeans and locks up your kneecaps. And you have been there for almost 2 hours now, and your back is screaming at you, and your knuckles are raw and cramping from gripping that little sanding block that came in the kit. And you started with the 400 grit like the instructions told you, and then you moved to the 800, and then the 1000, 500, and then finally the 2000. And by the time you got to that last sheet of ultrafine sandpaper, you were genuinely convinced that you were about to see through the headlight like a window. Because surely no one spends this much time and this much effort and this much money on a $30 restoration kit only to be disappointed. And then you peel back the masking tape you put around the housing and you stand up slowly because your knees absolutely hate you right now. And you step back and you look at the lens, and for about 4 seconds, it actually looks decent, and your heart lifts, and you think maybe it was worth it. And then the afternoon sun catches the lens at just the right angle, and you see it, that milky diffused haze sitting just beneath the surface, the kind of fog that does not wipe off because it is not on the surface. It is the surface now, because what you just spent 2 hours doing was not restoring your headlight, you were destroying it. You were grinding it away, one grit at a time. And 3 weeks from today, that lens is going to look exactly like it did before you started, maybe worse. And you are going to be standing in that same auto parts store aisle, reaching for the same $30 kit because the guy at the counter is going to tell you that you just need to reseal it with their special protective wipe that costs another 12 bucks. And the cycle starts again. And I am here today to blow that entire cycle apart. Because the thing that actually fixes yellowed headlights has been sitting in your bathroom this whole time. And it costs 50 cents, and it works in 30 seconds, and it does not require you to kneel on concrete for a single minute. Here is what they do not want you to know, and I mean that literally. Because the restoration kit industry in this country generates hundreds of millions of dollars every single year, banking on the fact that you will keep believing that sanding is the only path forward. So, before I tell you what the actual solution is, I need you to understand that you have been deliberately misled, not accidentally, not out of ignorance, deliberately, because the moment you understand what I am about to tell you, you never buy another kit again. And that is a problem for them. That is a revenue problem for every auto parts store that stocks those little boxes with the 4 sheets of sandpaper and the tiny bottle of compound and the instruction booklet that looks professional enough to make you trust it. So here it is. The thing sitting in most bathrooms and in virtually every hardware store for under $1, a plain white bar of pumice hand soap, the kind mechanics and painters use to scrub grease and paint off their hands. You have probably seen it. It is nothing fancy. It is not a detailing product. It is not marketed for cars. It is marketed for dirty hands. And that is exactly why nobody in the automotive industry wants you to know it works on headlights. Because you cannot charge $30 for a bar of soap that already costs 50 cents. And yet, that 50-cent bar of soap will remove years of yellow oxidation from a polycarbonate headlight lens in about 30 seconds of light, circular rubbing, with a damp microfiber cloth, no sandpaper, no compound bottles, no masking tape, no kneeling on concrete, none of it, just soap, water, and 30 seconds of your life. Now, I want every single person watching this to hit that subscribe button right now before we go any further, and I want you to understand why I am asking you to do that. It is not for the algorithm. It is because what we are building on this channel is a direct counter movement to the auto parts store business model that treats your car like a recurring revenue stream. They need you to believe that every single maintenance task requires a specialty product that only they sell. They need you to believe that headlight restoration requires industrial abrasives because if you knew the truth, you would walk right past their restoration kit display. And they cannot have that, so they have spent decades reinforcing this idea that polycarbonate plastic responds best to sanding and that anything less than a multi-step abrasive process is just a temporary fix. And that narrative is so deeply embedded in car culture that most people have never even questioned it. They just reach for the sandpaper because that is what everyone does. because that is what the guy on the YouTube channel sponsored by the kit brand told them to do. This channel does not take sponsorships from restoration kit companies. This channel does not take sponsorships from auto parts stores. What we do here is find the chemistry that actually works, and we tell you about it straight. So subscribe, share this with someone you know who is currently getting ripped off, and let us keep going, because the science behind why pumice soap works is genuinely fascinating, and it is going to completely change how you think about plastic degradation. Let us talk about what headlight fogging actually is at a physical level, because most people think of it as dirt or buildup, and that mental model is exactly why they reach for the sandpaper. The yellow haze is not on your headlight. It is in your headlight. Specifically, it is in the outermost molecular layer of the polycarbonate lens. Polycarbonate is an incredibly durable plastic, but it has one serious enemy, and that enemy is ultraviolet radiation. Manufacturers apply a thin UV protective clear coat to new headlights, but that coating degrades over time. It gets thin, it gets patchy, it eventually fails, and once it fails, the UV rays from the sun start breaking down the polycarbonate itself at the molecular level. The long polymer chains in the plastic begin to oxidize, they fragment, they cross-link in abnormal ways, and the result is a thin layer of chemically altered dead plastic sitting right at the surface of your lens. This dead layer is physically different from the healthy polycarbonate beneath it. It is more porous, it scatters light instead of transmitting it, and it has a yellow-brown tint because of the oxidation byproducts. That is, the fog you are looking at, it is a dead molecular skin on top of perfectly good plastic, and the correct approach is to remove only that dead layer as selectively and as gently as possible without disturbing the healthy polycarbonate underneath it. Sandpaper cannot do this. Sandpaper does not know the difference between dead oxidized plastic and healthy structural plastic. It removes everything indiscriminately at whatever rate its grit dictates. But pumice soap can do this, and here is why. The pumice particles in a bar of pumice soap are volcanic in origin. They are formed when lava cools so rapidly that gas bubbles become trapped inside the solidified rock, creating a material that is simultaneously extremely hard and highly porous. When that rock is ground down to the fine particle size used in hand soap, you end up with microscopic abrasive particles that are jagged at a very small scale, but not large enough to cut deep grooves the way sandpaper grit does. And here is the critical piece of this. Oxidized polycarbonate is significantly softer and more brittle than healthy polycarbonate because the polymer chains have been broken down. So, pumice particles at the concentration and particle size found in pumice hand soap are hard enough to abrade and lift the weakened oxidized layer, but not hard enough to cut meaningfully into the healthy polycarbonate beneath it. It is essentially selective exfoliation at a microscopic scale, the same principle dermatologists use when they talk about exfoliating dead skin cells from your face without damaging the living tissue underneath. You are not grinding your headlight, you are not removing structural material, you are precisely targeting the compromised surface layer and polishing it away while the healthy plastic beneath gets buffed to a smooth, light-transmitting finish. And the soap carrier itself matters here too, because the surfactants in the soap keep the pumice particles suspended in a thin, lubricating film against the surface, which prevents any individual particle from dragging and scoring the way a dry abrasive would. The whole system is designed to be gentle. It just happens to also be extraordinarily effective on the exact type of surface damage that years of UV exposure creates on polycarbonate. Now, let me tell you exactly what you are doing to your headlights when you use one of those $30 restoration kits, because I want you to feel this. I want this to be visceral enough that you never reach for sandpaper again. The typical restoration kit instructs you to begin with 400 or 500 grit sandpaper, which is genuinely coarse. These are not fine abrasives. These are the same grit levels used to strip paint off wood, and you are applying them to a headlight lens that in many cases is already between 2 and 4 millimeters thick at the point of maximum curvature. Every pass with that coarse sandpaper is removing a measurable amount of structural plastic, Automotive engineers working at the intersection of optics and polymer science have documented that multi-step sanding processes can remove between 15 and 25% of a headlight lens's surface thickness in a single restoration session. 15 to 25% of the structural material gone in one afternoon. And polycarbonate does not become more durable. As it gets thinner, it becomes more brittle. It becomes more susceptible to cracking under thermal expansion. It becomes more prone to spiderweb cracking in cold temperatures, and the optical properties of the lens change because the curvature of the surface that was engineered to properly focus and project your headlight beam is now subtly altered. The beam pattern shifts, the hot spot moves, the cutoff line that is specifically designed to keep your high beams from blinding oncoming drivers gets distorted, and then the kit instructs you to apply a UV sealant from that tiny little bottle that contains maybe 2 or 3 applications worth of product, and that sealant is what creates the brief clarity you see immediately after finishing, but that sealant has a service life of 4 to 8 weeks under normal sun exposure, and when it degrades, the unprotected, freshly sanded polycarbonate oxidizes again almost immediately because you just removed every bit of the original harder outer layer that slowed oxidation in the first place. So now you are back to fogged headlights, but with thinner lenses and a distorted beam pattern, and the kit worked exactly as intended from a business model perspective because you need another kit in 6 weeks. And in the meantime, you are driving at night with compromised headlight optics, which is not a detailing inconvenience, it is a safety issue. Let us walk through the actual protocol so you can do this correctly and get a perfect result the first time. And pay very close attention to the warning I am going to give you in a moment, because if you skip it, you will create a problem that is extremely difficult to fix. Begin by thoroughly rinsing the headlight lens with clean water to remove any loose dirt or debris, because any grit particles sitting on the surface before you begin can cause scratching that has nothing to do with the pumice soap itself. Once the lens is rinsed, wet it again generously and keep it wet. Take your bar of pumice soap and rub it directly onto a damp microfiber cloth until you have a visible lather built up. The microfiber is important here because it holds the soapy pumice suspension against the lens rather than just wiping it away. Apply the lathered cloth to the wet headlight and work in firm circular motions, covering the entire lens surface. You do not need aggressive pressure. Moderate and consistent pressure is what you want. Let the pumice particles do the work rather than trying to force the process with muscle. Work the entire surface for about 60 seconds per headlight, making sure to cover the edges and corners where oxidation often accumulates at the same rate as the center of the lens. After 60 seconds, rinse thoroughly with clean water and inspect the surface. In the vast majority of cases, a single application will produce a clear lens that looks factory fresh. For severe long-term oxidation, you may need a second pass using the exact same technique. Rinse again, and the result you are looking at is a polycarbonate surface that has been precisely exfoliated down to healthy plastic without any structural thinning, without any beam distortion, and without any sandpaper damage. Now, here is the critical warning, and I need you to read this carefully and remember it every single time you do this process. You absolutely cannot let the pumice soap dry on the lens while you are working, not even partially. And here is the exact reason why. When the soap carrier evaporates, the surfactants that keep the pumice particles evenly suspended and lubricated against the surface disappear with it. What you are left with are concentrated pumice particles sitting dry against the polycarbonate, and without the lubricating film, these particles no longer glide and exfoliate, they drag, and when a microscopic, jagged volcanic glass particle drags across a polycarbonate surface under pressure without lubrication, it does not polish, it carves, and it carves a scratch that is white and deep enough to scatter light in a way that is immediately visible and extremely difficult to remove. If you create these dry drag scratches in your headlight lens, you will see them most clearly at night when your headlight beam hits them and creates a diffused white glow across the lens that distorts your beam pattern and creates forward scatter that reduces your own visibility while simultaneously creating uncomfortable glare for drivers coming toward you. These scratches are not impossible to remove, but they require progressively finer wet sanding to address, which means you have now done the exact thing this entire video was designed to help you avoid. So keep the surface wet, add water frequently during the process, work in smaller sections if your lens is large, and never let the soap sit and dry while you are rubbing. A quick spray bottle of clean water near your feet while you work is the easiest way to make sure you never hit this problem. Wet work, constant hydration of the surface, that is the entire safety protocol, and it is simple enough to remember forever. Here is the final picture I want you to hold in your mind. On one side of the scale, you have a $30 restoration kit. You have 4 sheets of sandpaper in different grits. You have a tiny bottle of compound. You have a tiny bottle of UV sealant that will last about 6 weeks. You have instructions that tell you to kneel on your driveway for 90 minutes to 2 hours. You have the guarantee that your headlights will be fogged again before the end of the next month. And underneath all of that, you have the silent structural damage being done to your lens every time you go through the process. Thinner plastic, altered beam geometry, faster oxidation cycles because the harder outer surface is gone. It is a subscription disguised as a solution, and you are paying for it with your time, your money, and the physical integrity of your headlights. On the other side of that scale, you have a 50-cent bar of pumice hand soap that you can find at any hardware store or dollar store or pharmacy. You have a damp microfiber cloth. You have 60 seconds of easy circular wiping. And you have a crystal clear headlight that looks the same at week 6 and week 12 and week 18 as it did the day you cleaned it because you did not strip the surface, you exfoliated it. The chemistry is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. And you paid 50 cents for the privilege of understanding it. Now do me one favor. Right now, before you close this video, think about your neighbor. Think about that person on your street or in your family who you have personally seen kneeling in their driveway with a sanding kit, or who has mentioned their foggy headlights as a problem they cannot seem to fix no matter how many times they restore them. Send them this video right now, share it to your story, drop the link in a group chat, do whatever you need to do to get this in front of them before they sand their headlights one more time. Because every time they run that sandpaper across that lens, they are removing plastic they will never get back. And once the lens is thin enough, it does not restore, it replaces. And a replacement headlight assembly costs anywhere from $80 to several $100 depending on the vehicle. The 50-cent bar of soap is not just a detailing tip, it is the thing that keeps your headlights on your car and out of the parts recycler. Share this now. It matters more than you